Welcome to Cooking the Books. I'm Frances Cook. With our housing market officially running way past hot and right into scalding territory, people are looking for creative solutions. One that's getting renewed interest is tiny homes. The appeal is clear, at least to me. A smart, efficient use of space, exactly as big as you need and no more, that you could build yourself if you want, and that you can move to different locations if you suddenly need a beach break. But there are a couple of other things you need to consider too. Housing is how a lot of New Zealanders build their wealth, but really that wealth comes from the increasing value of the land underneath the house. Tiny homes usually don't come with land, so you're going to need to make a different plan for how to take care of your money. There's also the lifestyle factor of living tiny. Can you keep it up forever? Let's talk to someone who's giving it a crack.
News Talk ZB presents Cooking the Books with Frances Cook.
I'm joined now by Kyron Goss, Chairman of the New Zealand Tiny House Association. Now, what first got you interested in living in a tiny house?
For me, it was really looking at alternative ways of living and also future technologies and trends. I'm a bit of a futurist myself. I have been a property investor, and it was what comes next. And as I was looking out there, I saw the tiny house movement. You couldn't not notice the tiny house movement, and it was like, well, actually, this movement really has bones. And I started following it, just seeing what was happening. And after a while, I was living in Bali at the time, and I was like, no, I'm going to come back to New Zealand. I'm going to build my own tiny house and experience what it's all about. And for me, because I do travel a lot, this just gives me a New Zealand base. Gives me a New Zealand base, which doesn't cost the ends of the earth, that I have no problem locking up and leaving and being able to go traveling again. So for me, that's what it was all about.
That's really interesting that you were a property investor. I'd love to get into that a bit more because I think a lot of people, there can almost be a stigma attached to tiny houses of that's fine if it's all you can afford, or you would only do it because you had to, or something like that. So you obviously were able to get into the property market as an investor. What was that like for you? Are you still investing, and how is that different from where you are now?
I'm still investing a little bit, but for me, it's now taking an entrepreneurial approach to the property investing. So one of the projects I've got on at the moment is taking a campground and turning it into a bit of a tiny house village. So still the property aspect to it, but then the layer on top, which is, whether it's the future trend or in this case, it's the tiny houses. But ultimately, yeah, I could buy my own house, my own normal home. But it doesn't excite me. It doesn't really do anything for me. The way I see it is it's more of an anchor. If I have a house, I live in Auckland, so we're talking minimum 800,000 just to get a house, 1 million if you want a house that you like in an area that you like. In which case you'd be tied to paying that mortgage. You would not want to leave because you're not going to want to put a tenant into your home, right? I definitely wouldn't want to Airbnb it because then you've got all these random strangers coming into your home. So the whole tiny house side just made a lot more sense. Also, the tiny houses, you're able to do more with them. So for example, where I'm parked up at the moment is the bottom of a friend's place here in Auckland, where if she wanted to build, she'd have to chop down all these native trees. She'd have to put in a pipe to the little creek and, just do this insane amount of work. Whereas we can just slide in a tiny house, chop nothing down. In fact, we almost enhance the environment, and I'm able to live in this like amazing little oasis in the middle of Auckland City for what, 1/5, 1/8 of the price of buying here.
Yeah, that's crazy. And so walk me through it, because you said like at the moment you're living on a friend's land. You can change that if you want. So walk me through what are actually the features of a tiny house and how does that translate into your lifestyle?
So yeah, I should start by saying when we talk about tiny houses, what we're actually talking about is a tiny house on wheels. Essentially, imagine a very beautiful boutique caravan. That's the best way to describe it, is a caravan which looks like a little tiny house, and that's obviously where the term came from. So it is on wheels. Generally, they do have registrations, warrants. You can hook it up to a decent sized truck and tow it wherever you want.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's what that whole idea of freedom, flexibility. If I want to move anywhere, I can. It's just literally call a tow truck and move. My water is a hose plug-in. My electricity is just a caravan plug-in, and my wastewater just goes into a little tank which gets pumped up and taps into the main house's sewer.
Mm-hmm. How does
So
that translate in terms of, because I know when people have lived in when you've compared it to a caravan, does it have things like insulation to make sure that you have a decent living standard?
so my tiny house has 7 times the minimum insulation standards for our
Wow,
standards. So yeah, no offense, my tiny house is probably better than your house.
probably.
But that probably brings up a good point, right? Because it is relatively new. The tiny house movement and the concept is relatively new, and it's getting bigger each and every day. There are a few different types of tiny houses out there, or the way you'd build it. So you've got the DIYers who will build it themselves. You've got the professionals, so the actual custom tiny house builders, and then you've sort of got this gray area in the middle, which is where a house builder might come in and do a custom build for someone. So it is up to every single person who's building their tiny house or the project to ensure that they are building it to the right standards so that it is healthy. All the custom builders, any licensed builder, they will by nature, because those are the things they think about every single day. It's just those DIYers that you'd hope are putting enough in.
And I think, like you've mentioned, there's a lot more to it than just affordable housing. But of course, it is a big thing on people's minds right now, trying to find a house that they can afford and can call their own. And some people are pointing to tiny houses as a solution there. So do you see them as having a role to play?
I think they're massive in that space. So if we start putting prices to give context around it, from the affordable side, if you were to build your own tiny house and you didn't take into account the cost of your labor, you could do it as cheap as $30,000. But they generally average, DIYs generally average around 60 to 70,000. If you go to a custom tiny house builder, you're probably looking 100 to about 150, depending on how many bells and whistles and how big you do go. I think when we talk about tiny houses, people probably have a bit of a misconception about how big they are. One of the things most people say when they come to mine is, "Oh wow, it's bigger than I expected." So because it's a caravan or a tiny house on wheels, it's a vehicle. We often work to the NZTA rules for what a light simple trailer is, which means you can go 12.5 meters long, you can go 4.3 meters high, and you can go 2.55 wide. But most people then go to 3.1 or maximum 3.1, which would be the width of a wide load on a trailer.
Right.
So you could imagine a 12.5 by 4.3 meter high box, which would look like an extra large 40-foot container or something. You can actually do quite a lot with that. My one is 10 meters long. I've got 2 bedrooms in mine.
Wow. So you can have people come to stay.
Yeah, of course. I've actually, well, between 2 bedrooms and a fold-out couch, I could have 6 people sleeping here. You wouldn't want 6 people living here. That'd be a nightmare. But yeah, if it doesn't mean that I can't have friends.
Yeah. What about the financials, right? So you'll be across this because you're a property investor. But lots of people see their home as their biggest investment, which is something that I personally disagree with, but that's probably a soapbox for another day. I can see how people get there because you buy your home, you pay it off, you're saving a cost in the future, and it usually goes up in value. But what goes up in value technically is the land under the house, whereas tiny houses don't have that, or at least a traditional tiny house doesn't have that. So how does it work out in terms of the financials and your future planning?
So I'd absolutely agree with you that, yeah, most people sort of rely on their home as their investment plan. And if you look at it, then there are so many people out there who are equity rich in their home, but they still have to go out and work because they have no investments, or they have no other source of income. So I started playing with some numbers. And to give you an example, if we take the sort of medium cost of a commercially built tiny house, which would be around about 130,000. And let's say I went to my parents and I said, hey, you've got a ton of equity in your home. Can you release $130,000, lend it to me? I'll pay the mortgage on that 130, and I'll get a tiny house built and I'll go rent land somewhere. So assuming either way, I can go to my parents and I can get that 130K, then I worked out a few of the numbers. So if I took that 130K and I built a tiny house and I paid the a 30-year mortgage at 2.49%, which is what the Westpac calculator told me this morning, then I'd be paying $513 per month. Now,
Wow.
if I was to go, I mean, I'm in Auckland. So most places in Auckland, I should be able to find somewhere for $150 per week. Some areas might be a little bit more expensive, 200. Or if I go outside of Auckland, I might even be cheap as $50 to $100 per week.
Mhm.
So right now I actually do pay. I pay $150 per week, which includes my power, includes my water. So all up, that comes to $1,163 per month.
Wow.
Or $268 per week. So my first question would be, what can I rent in Auckland for $268 per week?
Mm.
A room. A room. So first off, compare owning my own tiny house to renting a room in a house in Auckland, right? I think I'm better off. I've got my own space. I can have friends come over. I can move my house whenever I want. I've got the other option, right? If my parents were to release that 130K and lend it to me, I could then use that 138K to buy my own normal house. And so at an 80% lend, that 130K would buy me a $650,000 house. First off, what are you going to buy in Auckland for $650,000? You're talking either somewhere I don't want to live or a unit, pretty much.
Yeah.
You might get lucky and get a townhouse somewhere. But yeah, there isn't too much available, 650,000. But let's say you found it. First off, your mortgage rate across 30 years is going to be $2,565 per month. You've then got electricity, water, and rates on top of that. So I worked that out. I've never actually paid my own electricity, so I'm just guessing here. $100 per month, water $100 per month, and rates usually averages out at about $166 per month. So all up to own my own house, that's $2,931 per month.
Mm.
The difference between those two are $1,768 per month. So there's that immediate saving, but like you say, yeah, houses generally appreciate in value. The first thing I'd say to that is we've seen more growth in the last 12 years than we've seen ever before. So there is this general conception, houses always go up in value, but we also know that's not true. We only need to look at around the world. One place I always love picking on is Port Hedland, which is in Western Australia. When I lived in Western Australia 10 years ago, prices in Port Hedland were $2 million. Now they're down around $400,000.
Oh,
So
you'd
we
be
can't
gutted.
exactly right. So we can't always just believe that house prices always go up in value.
Yeah.
But I started playing with an investment calculator, and if I took that $1,768 per month I'm saving and actually put that into an investment, which a smart investor should be able to get at least 10% per annum, then over the 30 years, that would be worth 3.6 million,
Mm.
which averages out at 100K per year
Yeah.
in interest.
Yeah,
So
this is the thing. I mean, is that part of your plan? Is that you're living this incredibly cheap and free and easy lifestyle, and then you are able to put your savings into investments? Is that the idea?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. So you've probably heard of the FIRE movement,
Mhm.
financial. Well, yeah. So the
Say it
financial,
anyway, just for the people who are not familiar.
yeah, FIRE, financial independence, retire early. And I think it's got bones, but it's also got, a lot of people don't like it because you live like a pauper for sort of 10 years.
Yeah,
So I sort of created my own acronym of the MEMI, minimal expenses, maximized income.
I
Um,
like that. Me, my.
MEMI. So you think, right? Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm, not living less of a life at the moment. I deliberately went into a tiny house myself so I could have actually a lot of the high quality materials that I couldn't have, in a big house. So I do have a engineered stone bench top and all that sort of thing. Um,
Nice.
which is pretty epic. So I'm living my best life, but I've also got more time, more freedom, more money to put into investments, to put into business, to buy property. I can still buy property, you know. I can still buy property and get all those capital gains. I'm just not forced to have to get capital gains through my own home in order to create that hope that in 30, 40 years time, I've got enough capital gains in order to sell my house and then maybe go into a retirement home? I don't know.
This is the thing. I mean, in terms of the lifestyle, I feel like as long as people have looked into it and they are interested in living like this and the freedom that it can provide, I feel like it can be an incredible solution as long as you treat it smartly. I don't think anything is a one-hit silver bullet, but in terms of being smart and being like, I'm saving so much, so I'm going to invest heaps elsewhere. I feel like that's a smart strategy. Do you ever struggle with the discipline though? Because it's not like a mortgage where if you forget to pay your mortgage, the bank will come knocking. They're not going to let you get away with that. But investments, it's up to you. No one's going to force you to do it. Do you ever struggle?
I have all mine automated.
Nice.
So the money's gone out before it even hits my account.
Yeah.
So not really. And it's all part of that lifestyle, all that mindset. I mean, this has been my strategy and this is why I've done it. Obviously, there are people who are getting into tiny houses because they have no other option.
Mm.
Um, but if they can at least sort of get their foot, get secure, get their foot into a tiny house, get secure, be able to start earning a bit more, so that they can then start thinking about investing as well, then that's brilliant.
Yeah. What do you think? Speaking of lifestyle, do you see this as a long-term living situation for yourself? Do you see any possibilities where it might push you out of a tiny house situation?
One thing I've learned from my life is never say never. The funniest, anything can happen to me. So I mean, yeah. I mean, I could easily imagine going into a normal house. It all depends on the circumstances. So I'm not you know, I wouldn't swear by tiny houses. They have a place, they have a purpose for the right people. Um, but yeah, it all depends on what you're trying to get out of it. I was working on those numbers before, and that same 130K, if you were starting off with nothing and you were to invest, like I said, then it would only take 5 years for you to have that 130K deposit to purchase your own home.
Mm.
So that is a strategy many people use. It comes down to why you want it. Some people, it's more sustainable, the sustainability factor. Where I'm parked at the moment, as soon as I move it, within a year, it will be back to its normal, its pre-tiny house environment. There's nothing been dug up. So, there's that factor too. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll live in one for the next 40 years, but for now I'm in one and I love it.
Yeah, and the living situation sounds gorgeous, being surrounded by bush there. I mean, how do you find good places to park up? Is it a situation of putting the word out amongst friends and saying, who would like to split the water bill with me? Are there other places you can go if you don't have that sort of network? How do you find a spot for yourself?
There is a website called Landshare. So that's where a lot of people go into Facebook communities, especially local communities. I've got friends who have just done letterbox drops. They'll sit there on Google Maps sort of searching and target certain properties. And then even targeting investors for property investors. If you've got a larger piece of land, which you don't want to subdivide, or it doesn't quite make sense to subdivide, you can easily park someone in there and be making an extra $150 per week.
With very little extra from the property investor, I would imagine.
Literally, what a caravan plug.
Yeah.
Wastewater is the biggest issue for something like that. So if you can figure out the wastewater, then yeah, sorted.
Oh, I love it. Well, if someone is listening to this and they're interested and they're thinking, okay, maybe this could be a solution for now, for the next few years, for whatever reason they're interested. Where can you get started in terms of figuring out what the lifestyle could be like for you and what you would have to do?
Probably just search for the different Facebook communities. There are a number out there, and there are a couple of big ones. There are some amazing YouTube videos which sort of share the layout and how it all works. And then we've also got the association website, nzherald.co.nz. But yeah, there's so much information out there. The biggest thing is it's about that minimalization. It's about efficiency. It doesn't mean living a substandard life. It just means living with what you think is necessary.
I love that. That's so good. Thank you. That's Kieran Goss, Chairman of the New Zealand Tiny House Association. Now, this did come from a lot of questions people have been sending me about housing lately. Quite a few of you have been sending me tiny house questions, also other housing questions. So I'm working on episodes that will answer all of these wonderful questions for you. If you have more, send them to me. I'll try to cram them all into one podcast episode for you. You can find me Facebook, Frances Cook Journalist, Twitter, Frances Cook, Instagram, Frances Cook NZ. Send through those questions. We'll try to get them answered. You can also subscribe to Cooking the Books pretty much everywhere you find your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Until next time, have a great day.